As always, we like to boost the throughput of optical wireless communication, or at least to get the highest throughput within the power budget that we have. Xiaochen, that is a topic that you have been studying.
Yes.
Can we just use throughput is proportional to the bandwidth times the logarithm of 1 plus signal to noise ratio?
Yeah, of course, that's basically the most straightforward way to evaluate or to estimate the throughput of the channel. Well, the channel equations. And the throughput is increased linear to bandwidth. The modulation bandwidth is used.
That's an Nyquist basically.
Yes. And
more bandwidth is more symbols per second.
Yes. Okay. And also logarithmically proportional to the signal to noise level, which, well, tells you if you have a high signal to noise level, noise power, signal to noise ratio, you are allowed to have more levels in your modulations. But this evaluation is, well, mostly valid for RF.
So this sounds very plausible, and many people say, but optical wireless communication intensity modulation, that's not the additive wide Gaussian noise channel that Shannon studied in 1948. In 1949, Shannon published another paper, which most people never read, and there he says, many practical systems still behave according to throughput is proportional to bandwidth multiplied by the logarithm of the power that I have, and that basically means that to have more levels of the signal I need to have exponentially more power. That is, to have more bits I have exponentially more levels, and that costs a lot of power.
Exactly, yes.
But things are different in optical wireless communication because that bandwidth is a whole different story.
Yeah.
Although still the basics of the equation are reasonably well if we massage it a bit. We've seen papers where also for optical channels with some correction factors, even the fact that the signal is non-negative, blah, 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 can be made to work.
Yes.
But then how about bandwidth?
Yeah, I think that the most different things between, well, one of the most important things between RF and optical wireless is, well, there's no hard limitations on bandwidth, modulation bandwidth in optical wireless communications because, well, the bandwidth, the spectrum is free for you.
There's no regulator that says
no,
you should not cause any interference outside the bandwidth that you're using. So it's a freedom that the designer has to see how far we go in bandwidth, and therefore we can trade, if we have more power,
yes,
to use it, to use a modulation bandwidth that is larger.
Yeah.
So there's no limitation in bandwidth, or?
Well, indeed, there's no regulations on bandwidth, but then there are always bandwidth limitations from the optical wireless communication links, from the components. For example, the LED light sources and also the photodiodes, the electronic circuits, they all limit the bandwidth. But one thing that makes it plausible is that we can easily model the frequency behavior of these components that we can use, well, somehow as a recipe to further model the channel, model the link, and somehow in the future to optimize the throughput.
Easily model? Well, a photodiode, for instance, is a current source with a capacitance in series to it.
Yes. Which
may be just a first order low pass filter.
Exactly. And well, if you look at the equivalent circuit, for example, for photodiodes, there's the dominant part is junction capacitance, and this capacitance limits the bandwidth, which shows the first order low pass. But then this capacitance also associated with the photodiode's area. So if you have a larger area, you have a larger junction capacitance. For smaller, you have a smaller junction capacitance. So in another way, the area of the photodiodes is associated to the bandwidth of the channel.
But I like to make it large because then I get in many photons.
Exactly, yes.
So then I have a strong signal. And indeed in this trade-off, it works in a very different way than that bandwidth and signal to noise ratio can be traded off according to bandwidth times logarithm of signal to noise ratio. It is different.
Yes.
But for that, we have to go back into the history, the great results of information theory.
Yes.
How far back in time do we need to go?
I think 1969 with Robert Gallagher basically derived the Lagrangian optimization, which allows you to modulate the signal beyond the 3 dB bandwidth to achieve the optimum, theoretically optimum throughput.
So what Bob Gallagher did is he studied a channel with a certain frequency response that is not flat, and within that bandwidth with different response levels,
Yes.
he found an optimization. So he wrote it as a Lagrangian optimization. Basically, within every bin of the frequency bands, you can do whatever you want. You can optimize for capacity within that band. But then the game is, how do I spread my power over all the frequency components?
Well, that's also part of the optimization problem. But then, it goes through a quite complicated mathematical expression. But then eventually, if we look at it, it actually get a quite beautiful, intuitive interpretation. It's called water filling. So, like you said, there's a low-pass channel, which is flat at a low frequency and drops down at high frequency. So if we flip this frequency response, we get a bathtub shape of our bowl, like shape of a bathtub. And to optimize the throughput, we have, the conditions that we have certain amount of power. And we imagine this amount of power as amount of water to pour in this bathtub. And then the shape of this water is constrained by the bathtub is actually the power spatial density. And then the throughput achieved by all of this is actually the optimal throughput out of this channel.
And I think that is one of the real smart things. Writing down the Lagrangian optimization is one thing, but then bringing it back to something that is easy to understand is something that I like a lot. Bob Gallagher did it in this water filling interpretation. Basically, we have this bathtub shape. If I add more power, more water, then also the shoreline, the highest frequency modulation goes up.
Yes.
So thereby, depending on the amount of power we have, we use more bandwidth beyond the bandwidth that the channel has by itself. And the higher you go up in frequency, the more careful you are with spending your power.
Yes.
Which is quite different from pre-emphasis, where you put all your power in the underperforming frequencies. Bob Gallagher told us that we should do more smartly with water filling, where basically you just use these high frequencies a little bit, but don't waste too much power there. But now, like the original Shannon equation, I would like to have an expression of the rate as a function of parameters of the channel and the power that I have.
Yes.
But you just left me with an optimization algorithm that I need to do.
Yeah.
Can we do something smart here?
Yeah. So, like we said, we have a certain amount of water, and we have a bathtub shape of the channel, which we can analytically express it in equations. Mm-hmm. And then, if we do the water filling, if we put the water in this cup, in this bathtub, we see the water is extended to different level of the shoreline, and this actually indicates how far you modulate your signal.
So that's a key parameter, that maximum modulation frequency.
Exactly, basically the maximum modulation frequency, Fmax. And with this Fmax, you can easily calculate the power that you need. Basically, take the integral or the sum over different frequency bands with respect to the water level.
Let me see if I understand that. So for every frequency component, water filling tells you how much power you should load there.
Yes.
And then for the channel, I have an analytical expression, first order low pass filter.
Yes.
So I can add that up, or rather solve the integral, if we assume it to be continuous. How does that work in optical wireless communication? So we implicitly assume that we go for DC over the M kind of modulation methods. Mm-hmm.
And we have different subcarriers. And then for different subcarriers, with water filling, we know the power level. Basically, that's the power spectral density. And then we for each frequency band, we times the power spectral density times the bandwidth of the subcarriers, and then we sum all the powers of all the subcarriers, and then we get the total amount of power.
So then I have power expressed as a function of the modulation bandwidth.
Yes.
But I want to have the rate.
Which is very similar way to get the power for example, for DCO FDM, we have different subcarriers, and For each subcarriers, we know the channel quality, and we also know at this moment the power spectral density, the power that is fed into the subcarrier, and then we can simply calculate the throughput with subcarrier bandwidth times the logarithm 2 to the 1 plus SNR for the subcarriers, and then to sum it over all frequency up to the maximum modulation frequency, and then we get the total amount of throughput.
Yeah, and if you do this as an integral rather than summing it, you even get an analytical expression.
Yes.
An analytical expression that I like because it looks beautiful.
Yep.
Let's dive a bit into it.
Yeah, if we look at the equation, we see rate is proportional to 3 dB bandwidth of the channel times 2 terms. First term is the cube root of power over, well, noise power spectral density, which is additive white Gaussian noise, times the 3 dB bandwidth of the channel. First term minus the arctangent with the same term.
We have the same cube root of power over noise, basically noise within the 3 dB bandwidth of the channel.
Yeah.
But the modulation bandwidth is larger.
Yes, so this is not typically what we see, what we call the signal to noise ratio. Which also give us which also makes the point that why we are not using the signal to noise ratio as a metric to evaluate, to estimate the throughput.
I've seen that a lot in papers. Signal to noise ratio is, and then systems are compared for the same signal to noise ratio, which sounds really like an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah.
But in fact, it is not, because we can play with the bandwidth, which is a design optimization, and two different systems may have two different optimal points. And also signal to noise ratio is not a constant.
No, especially for different subcarriers, the signal to noise ratio varies from, well, subcarriers to subcarriers. So, it's not really the best choice to use SNR for the whole channel in this scenario.
Yeah, so then we have the rate is proportional to the bandwidth of the channel. I can understand that effect. Although it is not bandwidth of the modulation, but bandwidth of the channel. But that's what the mathematics say. And then we have cube root of power in the noise bandwidth of the channel,
Yes.
even if you go beyond it, times the arctangents minus arctangents of the cube root of that argument. Still, it looks a little bit hard to interpret this equation.
Well, then we can basically see the effect, or see what it really gives us idea for, well, extreme scenarios, where we can talk about the scenario where we have very low signal power, and the scenario where we have sufficient, very much high signal power. So
Okay.
low power scenario and high power scenario.
Let's take the low power one first.
Yeah, if we take the low power scenario, we can do a little bit of a mathematical trick, which we take the Taylor expansion of the second term, the arctangent terms.
Yeah, which is a small number anyhow, so it's good to use the first 1, 2, 3 terms.
Yeah, maybe we use the first 3 terms. So the first term, we see it cancels out with the first term in the original expression.
So then the cube roots are gone.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the second term is 0, and the third term is we take the 3 times of the original term. And so at this time, we see the rate is proportional to signal power linearly.
So it's the cube root of power over noise raised to the power 3.
Yes.
And then we basically get rate is proportional to power.
Yeah. Which makes a lot of sense, because at this moment the channel is not limited by the bandwidth, because we do not go that far. Now the channel is desperate for the power. That's why we see, given a little bit of amount of power, the rate increase drastically or linear with power.
As a radio engineer, I would say the rate is proportional to the power that I have, which is logical because I need a certain energy per bit. EB over N naught needs to have a certain value. And that's exactly what this expression says.
Yes.
A beautiful expression, even with an arctangent in it, but with no logarithm. I like that when I look into it as a mathematician.
Yeah.
But it may be a bit hard to interpret it. So could we take some special cases, some limiting cases?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can look at well, the estimated throughput for two scenarios. But first, for a scenario where we have very limited amount of signal, so it's a low signal power scenario, and then the second scenario is where we have a very sufficient signal power budget, which is a high signal power scenario. If we first look into the low power scenario, what we can do is we take the, well, because it's very small power, we take the Taylor expression of the arctangent terms.
And then we only need 1, 2, 3 terms or so.
Yeah, let's take the first 3 terms. And we see that the first term of the Taylor expansion of arctangent terms cancels out with the first term in the original race equations.
Yeah. And then the cube root is gone.
Yes.
Okay, good.
And then, well, second term is 0. And the third term is the power of 3 of the original cube root.
Ah, okay. So then the cube root is gone again because we raise it to the power 3.
Yeah. And then at this time, we see the power is proportional to, no, we see the throughput is proportional to the power linearly.
Makes sense, because I need a certain energy per bit.
Yes.
And the more energy I have, the more bits
Yes.
per second I
Yeah.
can transmit.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the low power scenario?
Yeah, but wait a second.
Yeah.
I can understand it as a radio engineer, where rate has a lot to do with power. But if I interpret it as an optical fiber person, where I need a certain number of photons, then in intensity modulation, something weird is happening. The power, as in the signal-to-noise ratio when we make the decisions, is proportional to the square of the optical power.
Yes.
So then it says the rate is proportional to the square of the amount of light.
Yes.
Which is at odds with any concept of a number of photons per bit or bits per photons. This is different.
Yes.
That's an interesting observation here.
Yeah.
Okay, but so be it. That's what the mathematical model says. Shall we also take the other extreme, where, because I like strong signals,
Yes.
high throughputs?
Well, if we have sufficient enough power budget for signal, which is a strong signal scenario, well, for the arctangent term, it simply goes to pi over 2 because we have
Arctangent infinity is pi over 2, so you cannot go beyond that. Okay.
Exactly.
And that's a small term.
Yes. Small terms we can compare to total throughput. So at this moment, the throughput is mostly determined by the first term, which is the cube root of power over noise at the 3 dB bandwidth of the channel.
So my cube roots are still there.
Yes.
All right. So we saw that initially with low power, rate is proportional to power, or light power squared, and then it becomes proportional to the cube root of power, or cube root of optical power squared, optical power raised to the power 2/3. So it goes up much slower,
Yeah.
but still a lot faster than when I'm using Shannon's equation. It's not a logarithm of a signal strength.
Yeah.
I still gain quite a lot, and that comes because I can play with the modulation bandwidth.
Yes.
I can go further and further in modulating far beyond the 3 dB bandwidth.
Exactly. I think this is exactly what explains why, the increase versus the increase of throughput with regard to power slows down for a high power budget, is because for a high power budget we use a larger bandwidth, modulation bandwidth, to compensate. The large amount of power is used to compensate the bandwidth limitations with a larger amount of modulation bandwidth. That's why we see the throughput increase slowing down.
Yeah. But if we look into the bandwidth of the channel, modulation bandwidth is still not straightforward in this equation. It is optimized, but rate is proportional to the channel bandwidth multiplied by the cube root of 1 over the channel bandwidth. So in the end, it is proportional to channel bandwidth raised to the power 2/3. Okay. In some cases, we can make a trade-off for instance, in a photodiode. If we make it larger, we get a larger phi, we get effectively more light that comes in, but we pay the price of a bandwidth that is smaller.
Yeah. Interestingly, if we look at the trade-off between the area of the photodiodes and the bandwidth that's limited by the photodiode's capacitance, it actually cancels out in this high if we have a very sufficient power budget. So if you look at the equations, the signal power is 1/3, but then the optical power is 2/3. To power 2/3.
So there's area raised to the power 2/3. Yeah.
Yes, and so the power is determined by the photodiode's area. So the effect of photodiode's area on power is also to power 2/3.
Yeah.
While on the channel bandwidth that's limited by the photodiodes, the bandwidth limitation is actually -2/3. Because of the capacitance.
So bandwidth is proportional to 1 over the area size, and therefore the effect of affecting the bandwidth is also area to the power -2/3, and these two cancel out.
Yes, yes.
So it doesn't matter how large I make my photodiode.
Yes, if we model the photodiodes as a first order low pass, then for very high, very sufficient signal power budget, the size of photodetector doesn't matter anymore.
So in theory, for relatively small signals, weak signals, make the photodiode as large as possible. For stronger signals, there are other engineering constraints. But anyhow, having these expressions can be very useful.
Yes.
Some people said there is nothing as practical as good theory, and this may help to design a system.
Absolutely.
But if you want to read more about the theory, if you want to use this as an optimization,
please check our latest published paper on IEEE transaction communications with title you can find in introduction.
Thank you, Xiaochen.
Thank you, Jean-Paul, and thank you.